Hello, welcome to Phantom Homicide. Today, we're doing a really deep, unnerving dive into a case that I think lodges itself in the American psyche like few others. We're talking about the 1892 Borden axe murders in Fall River, Massachusetts. Everyone knows that little rhyme, right? Lizzie Borden took an axe. It's chilling, and it basically cemented her name in infamy forever.
It absolutely did. But that rhyme, it oversimplifies things so much.
Exactly. The real story is, well, it's incredibly complex. It's this suffocating web of circumstantial evidence, and it highlights some pretty serious flaws in the investigation back then.
And leaves us with this mystery that's never really been solved, officially at least.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to get past that rhyme. We want to look seriously at the other suspects, the social climate, class, gender, all of that, and really try to understand why these shadows still hang over the case.
It's vital to really place yourself back there, August 4th, 1892. Fall River. This wasn't just, a murder. It was an absolute atrocity that just shattered the peace of this respectable New England town.
Yeah.
Andrew Borden, the father, 70 years old,
Mm-hmm.
prominent local banker, incredibly wealthy, and his second wife, Abby Borden, 64. Both brutally hacked to death
Inside their own home.
inside their home in broad daylight. The sheer violence in that setting, it just stunned everyone. It became one of America's very first, huge media sensations.
And that's why we need to trace this path, right? Through all that circumstantial chaos. It's not just about the facts. You have to understand the intense social pressures of the Victorian era.
Definitely. Those constraints, especially around class and gender, they really dictated why only one person ended up being charged. Lizzie. And yet, why the fundamental question, who actually did it? Why that mystery has lasted well over 100 years. Let's get into the details of that morning.
Okay, so the crime scene itself, the sheer brutality.
We absolutely have to start there because the rhyme, it gets the number of whacks wrong, wildly wrong, actually.
40 and 41, it wasn't that.
No, but it captures the savagery perfectly. Abby Borden, the stepmother, she was hit first.
Yeah.
Sources say 18 or 19 distinct blows. Just staggering.
18 or 19 times.
And then Andrew Borden, the father, he got 11 or 12 blows. The weapon was clearly a hatchet, maybe an axe, used with just incredible frenzied force.
The descriptions from the time, they mention the victims being hacked almost beyond recognition. It's gruesome.
It's deeply disturbing. This wasn't some quiet, subtle poisoning. This was raw, close-up rage, an explosion of violence.
And that level of violence happening in such a confined space, that's precisely why the timeline becomes the absolute cornerstone of the case. This is what starts pointing fingers inside the house.
Exactly. The early forensic work, basic stuff back then, like body temperature, checking the stomach contents to see how far digestion had progressed.
Yeah.
It showed that murders weren't simultaneous, not even close.
Right, that's the crucial.
Abby died first. The estimate is around 9:30 in the morning. She was found upstairs in the guest room, maybe tidying up, making the bed, something like that. Andrew died much later. Downstairs, on a couch in the sitting room, probably resting, maybe napping. That was estimated around 11 a.m.
So that's a 90-minute gap, an hour and a half between the two killings.
That 90-minute gap, that is the single most compelling piece of evidence suggesting it had to be an inside job. It makes almost any other scenario incredibly difficult to believe.
Yeah, just think about the logistics. For an outsider, right? An intruder comes in, kills Abby upstairs, which must have been messy, bloody, somehow hides the body or at least avoids leaving immediate obvious traces.
Hides themselves, presumably with the weapon.
Right, and then just waits for an hour and a half for Andrew to come downstairs and present himself as the next target, all without being seen or heard by anyone else in the house.
Or leaving. They'd have to leave and come back unnoticed or stay hidden in that house.
It seems almost logistically impossible.
Especially when you factor in the house itself and Andrew Borden's personality. He was known for being incredibly frugal, yes, but also deeply paranoid about security.
The sources really emphasize that. They kept the doors locked, windows bolted, even in the sweltering August heat.
Constantly. So the police arrive, they check everything, no sign of forced entry anywhere, nothing broken, nothing jimmied, and crucially, nothing was stolen. Robbery wasn't the motive.
So if it wasn't an outside intruder, who does that leave?
It immediately narrows the focus dramatically. The only people known to be in that house during that window of time were Andrew and Abby themselves, the maid Bridget Sullivan, and the younger daughter Lizzie Borden. 4 people.
And that house. You described it as a pressure cooker earlier. Let's talk about that atmosphere. Andrew Borden, president of the Union Savings Bank, property developer. Very wealthy man.
Immensely wealthy for the time.
Yet he insists on living in this, well, modest house on 2nd Street, famously frugal, and the sources point out it lacked basic comforts. No electricity, no indoor plumbing. In August. Imagine how stifling that must have been.
Oppressively hot, apparently. And that physical discomfort probably just added to the emotional tension, which was thick.
Caused by
Resentment. Primarily from the daughters, Lizzie, who was 32, and her older sister, Emma, 42. They deeply resented their stepmother, Abby.
Didn't they refuse to even call her mother?
Often, yes.
Yeah.
Just Mrs. Borden. And this wasn't just, standard step-family friction. It was deeply rooted in money, in fears about their inheritance, what they called patrimony.
Okay, so what was the specific issue there? What sparked the tension?
It seems the immediate trigger was Andrew transferring some property, a farm, I believe, to Abby's sister.
Ah.
That caused huge arguments. For Lizzie and Emma, this was a massive red flag. It signaled that Abby was gaining influence, potentially diverting part of their father's substantial estate away from them.
So they saw their inheritance potentially shrinking, or at least threatened by Abby's side of the family.
Exactly. They felt their financial future, their security was being challenged by this woman they already disliked and viewed as, well, an outsider who married their father after their mother died. So you have this small, hot, locked house simmering with unspoken and sometimes spoken rage about money and control.
It sets a very ominous stage.
It really does.
So once you have that timeline, the locked doors, the internal tensions, suspicion naturally fell, and fell hard, on the one person who's dominated this whole story, Lizzie Borden.
The prosecution's case against her was entirely circumstantial. There was no smoking gun, no eyewitness, but the accumulation of those circumstances, point by point, it paints a really damning picture.
Let's start with the most basic thing. Opportunity.
She was there. She was on the property for the entire duration, covering both murders. That critical 90-minute window, we talked about how difficult that is for an intruder scenario.
Almost impossible.
But for Lizzie, she had the run of the house. She knew the layout, the routines. She was present.
And her explanation for where she was during her father's murder, around 11 a.m., that's where things get really problematic for her, right? The barn loft alibi.
Hugely problematic. She claimed she'd gone out to the backyard barn, climbed up to the loft, and spent about 15 to 20 minutes up there.
Doing what?
Looking for lead sinkers. For fishing. Which in itself seemed a bit odd to investigators, but the real issues were physical.
The heat.
The heat. Police officers who went up there shortly after described the loft as suffocatingly hot. Unbearably so. The idea of anyone voluntarily spending 20 minutes rummaging around up there on a sweltering August morning, it just strained belief.
Okay, maybe she really needed the sinkers, but there was more, wasn't there?
Yes. The dust. The loft floor was apparently covered in a thick layer of undisturbed dust. If she'd been up there for 15 or 20 minutes, walking around searching, surely there would have been footprints, scuff marks, anything.
But there's nothing.
Police found nothing. No evidence she'd been up there at all. So that alibi, the stifling heat, the odd reason, the lack of footprints, it immediately looked flimsy. Maybe even rehearsed, like something constructed to put her outside the house but still nearby.
It feels weak, but the suspicious behavior wasn't just limited to that morning, was it? There's the incident the day before.
Ah, yes. The poison attempt. This is a really chilling detail. The day before the murders, witnesses confirmed Lizzie went to Smith's drugstore in Fall River.
And tried to buy what?
Prussic acid. Hydrocyanic acid. One of the most lethal poisons known at the time. Extremely fast-acting.
Why on earth did she say she needed it?
This is almost comical if it wasn't so grim. She claimed she needed it to clean a sealskin cape.
To clean a cape with deadly poison.
Exactly. The pharmacist, a man named Eli Bentz, he was immediately suspicious. He knew prussic acid had no such household use. It was dangerous, tightly controlled stuff, used sometimes in photography or specific medical contexts. It wasn't for cleaning fur.
So she refused to sell it to her.
He did, and that refusal is significant. It suggests to some, including the prosecution later, that maybe Lizzie's first plan was poisoning. Quieter, cleaner, perhaps seen as more feminine.
And when that failed,
she resorted to the axe the next day. That's the theory anyway. It points towards premeditation.
Her behavior around the time of the murders also raises huge psychological questions. The night before, she apparently confided in a neighbor.
Yes, her friend Alice Russell. Lizzie went over and told Alice she was deeply worried, that she felt something is hanging over me, and feared that some unidentified enemy might try to harm her father.
Now, was that genuine anxiety? Or was she, laying the groundwork, planting the idea of an external threat before the crime even happened?
It's impossible to know for sure, but it certainly looks suspicious in hindsight. Then there's the matter of Abby's absence after she was killed, but before Andrew was. Lizzie tried to explain it.
The mysterious note.
The mysterious note. Lizzie told Bridget, the maid, and later others, that Abby had received a note summoning her away to visit a sick friend. But despite extensive searches of the house,
no note was ever found.
Never found, which strongly suggests it was a fabrication, an attempt to cover the fact that Abby was already dead upstairs while Lizzie was downstairs with her father.
And her general demeanor on the day. People commented on it, didn't they?
They did. Witnesses, including the first doctor on the scene, described her as remarkably cool, calm, and steady, which struck many as incredibly odd given the circumstances.
Finding your father butchered on the sofa, you'd expect hysterics, shock, overwhelming grief.
Exactly. And the prosecution really hammered on this, portraying her lack of overt emotion as unwomanly, which was a powerful accusation in that era. It suggested a coldness, a lack of normal human feeling.
It's also bizarre what she did right after discovering Andrew's body. People came to help, neighbors, the doctor.
And she sent them off on errands. Sent one person to fetch the doctor who was already there, sent another to find her sister Emma who was out of town. Various tasks that got people out of the house.
Why would she do that? Why choose to remain essentially alone in a house where, according to her own potential narrative, a brutal killer might still be lurking?
It looks less like panic and more like control. Trying to manage the scene, maybe want time, prevent others from seeing something. It's deeply suspicious behavior.
And hovering over all these behavioral oddities, and the weak alibi is the big one. Motive.
The money. Andrew Borden was extremely wealthy. His estate, after everything was settled, was valued at something over $500,000 back then.
Which in today's money is?
Estimates vary, but somewhere in the region of $8 million, maybe more. A massive fortune.
And Lizzie, along with her sister Emma, stood to inherit it all once both Andrew and Abby were gone.
Correct. The prosecution's argument was simple. Pure, cold-blooded greed. Lizzie resented her father's miserly ways. She felt entitled to a grander lifestyle, the high society life her wealth should have afforded her. Getting rid of both her father and stepmother was the fastest way to unlock that fortune.
So, motive, opportunity, suspicious behavior. But the big sticking point for the defense was always the physical evidence, or lack thereof, especially blood. How could she commit such brutal attacks and not be covered in it?
That was their strongest card. But then, 3 days after the murders, comes another incredibly suspicious act, observed by the same neighbor, Alice Russell.
The burning dress.
The burning dress. Alice Russell saw Lizzie in the kitchen, deliberately burning a dress in the stove. It was described as a blue cotton or corduroy dress.
And why is that specific dress significant?
Because Bridget Sullivan, the maid, had testified earlier that Lizzie was wearing a light blue dress on the morning of the murders.
So Lizzie's explanation.
She claimed it was an old dress stained with paint. Old paint, nothing to do with the murders, just getting rid of a ruined garment.
But Alice Russell didn't buy it.
Not at all. Alice was already wary of Lizzie's behavior, and seeing her burn that specific dress so soon after the horrific events, claiming it was paint, it was deeply unnerving. It looked exactly like someone destroying crucial evidence.
And the grand jury heard all this, the timeline, the motive, the alibi issues, the poison attempt, the dress burning.
And it was enough. They indicted her for the murders of her father and stepmother.
Yet, despite that mountain of circumstantial evidence, and it really is a mountain when you lay it all out, Lizzie Borden was acquitted. How did that happen?
It happened because her defense team, led by a very politically savvy and powerful figure, the former governor of Massachusetts, George Robinson.
Having a former governor helps.
It certainly doesn't hurt. They played the social cards class and gender with absolute mastery.
Explain that. How did they use class and gender?
They constructed a narrative, essentially, for the all-male jury. They presented Lizzie as this pillar of the community, a respectable gentlewoman, active in her church, a Sunday school teacher. And they argued, very forcefully, that a woman of her standing, her refinement, her perceived fragility, was simply incapable, physically and morally, of committing such a brutal, messy, savage crime.
So they leaned into the stereotype of the delicate Victorian woman.
Heavily. They put femininity itself on trial, almost. The jury and much of the public simply couldn't reconcile the image they had of Lizzie, this quiet, church-going woman, with the sheer violence of hacking someone to death nearly 20 times. It created cognitive dissonance.
The gender card, as we'd maybe call it now, it acted as a shield?
A very effective shield. and it directly impacted how potentially crucial evidence was handled, particularly the blood evidence, or lack thereof, on Lizzie.
Right, the defense kept saying, where's the blood on Lizzie?
Exactly, it was a powerful point. But later research, looking back at police reports and testimonies, highlighted something the trial jury didn't fully grapple with: that pail of bloody rags found in the basement.
Which Lizzie had an explanation for.
An explanation that perfectly showcases the era's social taboos. She claimed the blood was due to menstruation.
And because it was menstruation?
The police, all men, became incredibly uncomfortable. It was simply not something discussed openly or investigated thoroughly in polite society back then. They asked the family doctor to confirm her claim. He presumably did, based on her word. And then they essentially just dropped it. The source material says they completely ignored this potentially vital evidence.
Even though the maid, Bridget Sullivan, later said she hadn't seen that specific pail of rags when she did the laundry earlier that week.
Correct. That detail suggests the rags appeared after her regular laundry day, possibly linked to the murders. But the defense had already built this wall of propriety around Lizzie, and the prosecution couldn't or wouldn't breach it effectively on this point. The jury likely barely considered the rags.
So social maneuvering was key. But the defense also won some major legal battles, didn't they? Victories that significantly weakened the prosecution's case.
Two absolutely crucial rulings went their way, suggesting the system itself might have been tilted.
What was the first one?
The exclusion of Lizzie's testimony from the preliminary inquest. This was a hearing held shortly after the murders, before she was formally charged, but while she was clearly the prime suspect.
And her testimony was problematic.
Deeply problematic. It was rambling, confused, full of contradictions, and contained statements that were quite incriminating when scrutinized. She seemed unable to keep her story straight.
So why was it excluded?
The defense argued successfully that during that inquest, she was effectively being treated as a defendant, a prisoner, but she hadn't been formally warned of her right to remain silent, her Fifth Amendment rights. Essentially and crucially, she didn't have a lawyer present.
So procedural grounds.
Yes. They argued her rights were violated, and therefore that entire damaging testimony couldn't be used against her at the trial. This was a massive blow to the prosecution, removing some of her most self-damaging statements from the jury's consideration.
Okay, what was the second big win for the defense?
Excluding the testimony about the prussic acid purchase.
Wow, that seems incredibly relevant to intent, right? Trying to buy deadly poison the day before.
You would absolutely think so.
Yeah.
It showed premeditation, a murderous state of mind. But the judges ruled controversially that the prosecution hadn't adequately proven a direct link between the attempted poisoning and the actual axe murders that happened the next day.
That seems like a stretch.
It does. They essentially said, okay, she tried to buy poison, but you can't prove that attempt is legally relevant to the completely different method used a day later. So witnesses could confirm she tried to buy it, but the jury wasn't allowed to consider it as evidence of her intent to murder her parents with an axe.
So take away the contradictory inquest testimony, take away the evidence of premeditation via the poison. What's left for the prosecution?
Mainly just her presence at the scene, the weak alibi, the financial motive, and the suspicious burning of the dress. Still strong circumstantial points, but significantly weakened without the supporting evidence of her own confused words and the prior poisoning attempt.
And you mentioned the judges. There were whispers about bias there, too.
More than whispers.
Mm-hmm.
The trial environment was quite suspect. There were definite conflicts of interest. The presiding judge, Albert Mason, and another judge on the panel, Justin Dewey, both had known political connections to Lizzie's lead defense lawyer, the former Governor Robinson.
Okay, that doesn't look good. A network of powerful men potentially protecting one of their own class.
It certainly raises questions, and those questions become louder when you look at Judge Dewey's final instructions to the jury.
The charge to the jury. How was it biased?
It's supposed to be an impartial summary of the law and how to apply it to the evidence, but Dewey's charge read like a closing argument for the defense. He openly questioned the prosecution's theories, offered innocent interpretations for Lizzie's actions, and strongly emphasized the possibility of an unknown intruder, an outside assassin.
He was essentially telling them how to acquit her.
He gave them a very clear path to not guilty. He didn't just explain reasonable doubt. He actively sowed it regarding the prosecution's entire case.
So with key evidence excluded, the gender shield firmly in place, and a judge practically advocating for acquittal.
The outcome was almost inevitable. The jury deliberated for an incredibly short time. Some reports say as little as 10 minutes. Others say maybe an hour. certainly less than 90 minutes.
That's astonishingly fast for a double murder trial.
It is. They came back with a verdict of not guilty. The consensus from the sources is that the prosecution just couldn't overcome the hurdles. They relied too much on circumstantial evidence, couldn't definitively counter the unthinkable idea of a woman like Lizzie doing it, and ultimately failed to meet the standard of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, especially with the judge's final push.
So Lizzie walks free. But the acquittal doesn't exactly end the story or answer the question. If the case against her was so strong, yet she was found not guilty, it leaves a huge vacuum, doesn't it? If not Lizzie, then who?
Exactly. The mystery deepens. We have to seriously consider the other people who were potentially involved or overlooked, the alternative agents.
Let's start with the person closest to the scene besides Lizzie. Bridget Sullivan, the maid.
Bridget, yes.
Yeah.
She was 25, an Irish immigrant. She was right there in the house. The main theory involving her isn't usually that she acted alone, but that she might have been an accomplice to Lizzie.
Helping her how? Cleaning up? Providing an alibi?
Potentially both. Or perhaps just staying silent about something she saw or heard. The key suspicious point around Bridget is her own testimony about the morning.
She said she didn't hear anything.
She claimed she was resting upstairs on the 3rd floor after having been outside washing windows earlier. And she insisted she heard no screams, no sounds of struggle during either attack, despite the incredible violence happening just 1 or 2 floors below her.
Given how brutal the attacks were, that silence seems unlikely.
It raises serious questions about her credibility, yes. Was she really asleep? Or was she deliberately ignoring things, or perhaps even prevented from hearing things?
And didn't she mention hearing something odd between the murders?
She did. A really unsettling detail. She reported hearing a sound she described as a muffled laugh coming from upstairs the 2nd floor, where Lizzie claimed not to be during that 90-minute gap.
A muffled laugh. That's chilling. Was she trying to implicate Lizzie, or did she genuinely hear something terrifying?
We just don't know. But her actions after the trial also fueled suspicion.
The rumor about Lizzie giving her money?
A very persistent rumor, yes. That Lizzie paid her off, gave her a substantial sum, and told her to go back to Ireland and essentially disappear.
Did she go back to Ireland?
No, interestingly. But she did leave Fall River almost immediately. She moved all the way out west to Butte, Montana, a rugged mining town, a world away from Massachusetts.
And did she talk about the case?
Very rarely. She lived a quiet life and seemed to actively conceal her connection to the Borden murders for decades. That sudden move and lifelong secrecy certainly fed the theory that she knew more than she ever told, perhaps protecting Lizzie or herself.
Okay, so Bridget is one shadow. Who else was potentially involved? What about family?
John Morse. He's a key figure often mentioned. He was Andrew Borden's brother-in-law from his first marriage, so Lizzie and Emma's maternal uncle.
And he was visiting.
He was staying in the house the night before the murders. Specifically, he was sleeping in the upstairs guest room.
The very room where Abby's body was found.
The exact room. Now, Morse had an alibi for the actual time of the killings. He claimed he was out visiting other relatives nearby. He left the house before Abby was killed and returned after Andrew was killed.
Convenient timing.
Very convenient timing. While his alibi seemed to hold up, he was one of the last people to see Andrew and Abby alive, and his presence in that specific room, right before the murder, is undeniably suspicious.
What's the theory about his involvement? Did he do it himself?
The more common theory isn't that Morse wielded the axe, but that he might have been involved in the planning. Perhaps colluding with Lizzie, maybe offering advice or assistance in return for a future share of the inheritance.
Tying back into those family financial disputes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It connects to the ongoing tensions about Andrew's property and who would ultimately benefit. Morse's presence adds another layer of internal intrigue.
So we have the possibly complicit maid, the suspiciously present uncle. But the defense needed something else, didn't they? They needed an external possibility.
They absolutely did. To counter the inside job logic, they needed a plausible outsider. And that's where the somewhat shadowy wild man theory comes in.
A random, crazed killer.
Precisely. It fit the sheer brutality of the crime, which seemed, to some, too savage for a woman like Lizzie. And this theory wasn't just pulled out of thin air. There were sightings.
Sightings of whom?
Several people in Fall River reported seeing a strange man, described as pale and acting oddly, loitering near the Borden house in the days leading up to August 4th.
Just hanging around.
Yes. One woman specifically claimed she saw this man leaning against the Borden's front gatepost on the actual morning of the murders. So it established this unknown, potentially threatening presence right on their doorstep.
But the most compelling account supporting this theory came later, right?
Yes, and it's incredibly dramatic.
Yeah.
About 12 days after the murders, roughly 4 miles outside of town, a farmer, who is French-Canadian, encountered a very disturbed man.
What was that man doing?
He was talking to himself, repeating the phrase, "Poor Mrs. Borden, poor Mrs. Borden," over and over again.
That's specific and very eerie.
Extremely. When the farmer approached him, the man became agitated, allegedly brandished a hatchet.
The hatchet.
Yes, threatened the farmer with a hatchet, and then fled into the nearby woods. And as he ran, the farmer noticed something crucial.
What?
Specks of blood on the man's shirt.
Blood on his shirt, 12 days later, muttering the victim's name and carrying a hatchet. That sounds incredibly suspicious.
It does. Now, legally, this testimony was ultimately excluded from the trial. The judges ruled that the incident happened too long after the murders to be definitively linked.
But the jury heard about it.
The defense made sure the story got out, even if the testimony wasn't formally admitted. And you can't unhear something like that. The image of this mysterious, bloodstained man with a hatchet repeating Abby Borden's name. It provided the perfect seed of doubt. It gave the jury that plausible alternative, that violent external force that maybe fit the crime better than the Sunday school teacher's standing trial.
It's a powerful counter-narrative. So Lizzie is acquitted. She walks out of the courthouse, a free woman, legally innocent. What happens next? Does life go back to normal?
Far from it. The notoriety clung to her like a shroud. She and Emma did briefly return to the house on 2nd Street, which must have been just psychologically unbearable.
Living in the murder house, I can't imagine.
But Lizzie now had access to the inheritance. She finally had the wealth she seemed to crave. So fairly quickly, they moved.
To where?
Lizzie bought a grand, impressive mansion in the most fashionable neighborhood of Fall River, known as The Hill. A big 14-room Queen Anne-style house.
A major upgrade.
Huge. They named it Maplecroft. And Lizzie began to live the life she'd apparently always wanted. She hired servants, furnished the house lavishly, even started going by the more sophisticated name Lizbeth.
Trying to reinvent herself.
Completely. She even commissioned a large, expensive granite monument for Andrew and Abby's graves, a very public display.
But could she buy acceptance along with the mansion?
Absolutely not. Maplecroft might have been on the hill, but Lizzie remained firmly on the outside. Fall River Society, the very people she likely wanted to impress, completely shunned her.
Former friends, church members.
All turned their backs. Cousins, old acquaintances, ostracized. Maplecroft became a local landmark of notoriety. School children would gather outside, taunting her, chanting that horrible rhyme.
So she was wealthy but isolated. A social pariah.
Utterly. The local newspapers kept the story alive with thinly veiled articles constantly implying her guilt. Society had rendered its own verdict, regardless of the court's decision. Her attempts at throwing parties or living extravagantly only seemed to fuel the gossip look at her, spending the blood money, celebrating her freedom.
And this new lifestyle, this search for acceptance elsewhere, eventually caused a rift with the one person who had stood by her, her sister Emma.
Yes. Lizzie became very interested in the theater. She started traveling, going to Boston and New York, attending plays, and she cultivated a new circle of friends, actors, artists, more bohemian types, compared to Fall River Society.
Including one actress in particular.
Nance O'Neill. Around 1904, Lizzie formed a very intense, close relationship with O'Neill. They traveled together. Lizzie threw lavish parties for her.
And the rumor mill went into overdrive.
Exactly. Gossip immediately started swirling that their relationship was romantic, possibly sexual.
Yeah.
For that time period, especially for a woman with Lizzie's already scandalous reputation, this was explosive, a major taboo.
And Emma couldn't handle it.
Emma, who had been Lizzie's staunchest defender through the trial and the initial years of isolation, apparently reached her breaking point. She deeply disapproved of Lizzie's lifestyle, her extravagant spending, and particularly the intense, gossip-fueled relationship with Nance O'Neill. The atmosphere in Maplecroft reportedly became toxic.
So Emma left.
In 1905, yes.
Yes.
Emma moved out, permanently. Sources quote her as saying the conditions had become absolutely unbearable. They never reconciled. The sisters remained completely estranged for the rest of their lives.
Wow. So Lizzie achieved the wealth, but ended up even more alone.
Profoundly alone, it seems. She lived out her days in Maplecroft, surrounded by her wealth, but cut off from her family and her community. She died there in June 1927 at the age of 66.
And Emma.
In a final, almost eerie twist, Emma died just 9 days later in another town. They were buried in the family plot in Fall River near Andrew and Abby. The final dark chapter closed on a family destroyed by violence and suspicion. So looking back at this whole deep dive, you see why the Borden case just refuses to fade away. It's not simply the shocking nature of the crime itself. It's the perfect storm of conflicting, yet weirdly persuasive narratives.
Right. On the one hand, you have this incredibly strong circumstantial case against Lizzie.
Yeah.
The motive is crystal clear, that inheritance, the resentment. The opportunity is undeniable she was there. The 90-minute timeline makes an outsider seem almost impossible.
Plus her behavior, the contradictory statements, the lack of grief, the weird errands, the poison attempt, and crucially, the burning of that blue dress. It all points in one direction.
But then you pivot, and you see the other side just as clearly. The powerful defense strategy, masterfully playing the gender and class cards in a way that resonated deeply with the Victorian jury.
And the systemic failures. Key evidence being thrown at her inquest testimony, the prussic acid evidence, that crippled the prosecution. Add in the potential judicial bias, the judge practically leading the jury towards acquittal.
And those lingering alternative possibilities, however faint, the maid who might have known more, the uncle who was conveniently absent, and that chilling specter of the wild man with the hatchet. It creates just enough doubt.
It really does. The case becomes this fascinating, frustrating study in how we weigh circumstantial evidence, how societal expectations can shape justice, and how flaws in the legal process can leave a crime perpetually unsolved.
Because ultimately, no one ever found that definitive piece of evidence, right? The bloody axe with Lizzie's fingerprint, a confession, nothing concrete. The state simply couldn't meet the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
And that leads us to the final, really provocative thought that emerges from all this. Maybe the most shocking thing about the Borden case isn't definitively knowing who swung the axe.
What is it then?
It's the stark realization of how much a person's social standing, their class, their gender, their reputation as a gentlewoman in that specific time and place could shield them. That a respected woman could be the only plausible suspect left alone in a house with her parents' butchered bodies, could be seen destroying potentially vital evidence like that dress, and still walk free.
Not necessarily seen as innocent by society, though.
No, not innocent, but free. Forever defined by the crime, forever isolated but never legally convicted. Perhaps that lingering infamy, that life as a pariah, was its own kind of life sentence. The ultimate price she paid wasn't in prison, but in becoming Lizzie Borden, the legend.
Okay, so we hope you liked our today's discussion. For more such discussions, subscribe to our channel, Phantom Homicide.